Hello and welcome to the Big Van Book Club. My name is Rory and I am here with the very lovely and very talented Avalon Bourne. Hello, Avalon.
Hello, Rory. Hello, everyone.
And after a somewhat extended break, so that Avalon could see her indie bands, we are back to talk about The Broken Places with Frances Peck. And if you have not encountered this show before, that's fair, because it's very new. It's about Vancouver literature, which is about as niche as you get. So, but we're reading books from great Vancouver authors, and the book that we're reading is The Broken Places by Frances Peck. We read part 1. There's 5 parts in the books, which are then subdivided into chapters. If you want to watch that episode, if you want to catch up and watch this one later and then catch us on the 3rd, you're welcome to do that. But all we'll be talking about in this episode is the second part of Broken Places, which is chapters 7, 8, and 9, and a little hanging on introduction and the beginning of part 2. We will be discussing these chapters in order, so if you are a person who did not have a chance to get all the way up to chapter 9, don't worry about it. We won't get to like a summary of this whole section or discussion of all the spoilers in it until the very end. GS says, hi, Avalon and Rory. Hello, GS. So, with that said, if you have not met me before and you don't know what this channel is or anything like that, Varietal Literature is a group of writers from Vancouver, which includes Avalon, who were writers together at the Writers Studio in 2018 under the tutelage of Kevin Chong, and we sort of have continued hanging out in spite of our abrasive personalities. No, I'm kidding. A little bit. I mean, fiction writers tend to be a little bit introverted, and maybe that's not the right word, but they're not like the nonfiction people. The nonfiction people are very huggy and open and seem like they've been to therapy and are fairly healthy about themselves. That's not the makings of a good fiction writer. No.
We don't go to therapy. We write made up stories to deal with our issues.
JKR has made that point this week with her books. I don't know if you saw that. You can go to therapy or you can create fictional scenarios where you're a victim and then make money off them.
Yeah.
All right, I'm opening with hot takes. Anyways, Big Van Book Club celebration of Vancouver literature. And if you have been reading along, though, there is a live chat. Join in the live chat. Give us your own views on each of the chapters as we read them. I'm going to summarize them to remind you of what each was about, so that you can involve you in our discussion, because it is indeed a book club. And obviously, like, we'll dominate the time because we got the cameras and the mics, but I am equally interested in what everybody else's thoughts are on it. It is truly a book club that you can attend in your underwear. So, I don't see any reason not to simply go into it. Oh, I see one reason. Just a second. There we go. Okay. So I guess just a reminder in case, because we haven't been away for 2 weeks, and that might be a little while for some people. You might have read it right away. Basically what we're reading is a book based in Vancouver about multiple viewpoints. There was Annie and Dodie, which is a caretaker from Ukraine, taking care of a rich old white woman who has some sort of mental decline going on. And the queer couple, Kiki and Joe, Kiki being kind of a independent entrepreneur, working class kind of guy, whereas Kiki is a plastic surgeon of some success. And Sydney, Tayne, and Charlotte Stedman, who are just a terrible family full of terrible people who got worse in this section, but we'll talk about that. Who own a house right down on the waterfront that a lot of the action has come to center around And for those who don't remember, Charlotte and Kiki are the exception here. Charlotte is way off in Fraser Valley, eventually sort of out near Chilliwack picking up a certain type of cheese. And Kiki, on the other hand, was doing his own personal triathlon of guilt because he had cheated on his partner, because he sort of admits that he's kind of a casual sex addict. And I guess the way he sweats out the sin is to do a lot of kayaking and then trail running. And so he was running on a trail. And of course, in part 2 here, so coming into new content, the point of the story is finally solidified, which is all of these people have intersecting lives during what's called the Big One in Vancouver. Now, the Big One, I don't know if people who aren't on this fault line will have ever heard of this, because it's not just a Vancouver thing, but it is kind of, you got to be near the fault line. There's a fault line that Vancouver, and I think it goes down to California even, that it's a, as the book describes, a subduction zone that, as the book also mentions, about twice a millennia has a catastrophic level of earthquaking, and if that is the proper verb, the premise of this therefore rings quite true for people like myself who live in Vancouver. But if you live outside of it, you should know there's no real like fantasy element to that. It's a well-known thing in Vancouver that at some point, probably in the next 100 to 200 years, there is going to be, which by the way could be tomorrow or in 200 years, that's what that means, a completely city-wrecking earthquake. So what part 2 is about is the shaking of that earth. And what I want to ask chat off the top is, how did they feel for this section that we're coming into, which is the just sort of on the ground, in-person description of an earthquake? How did that like immerse you as a reader, and or not immerse you? And whatever way it went, what do you think helped it do that, or caused it to fail at doing that? Like, I guess what I mean is, like, for example, I'm asking chat if like you were like, yeah, I was right there with Sydney. Well, it was shaking, and it was really down to like how they described the details, or whether it's like I wasn't there because it felt like, why wasn't she more scared, and why was she just confused, and like whatever else. So, and I'll open it with my favorite line in this very brief little opening section: a kernel of popcorn in a vast heated pan. I thought that did a lot of work to show a person getting tossed around and how small you would feel in an earthquake, having never been in a serious earthquake, been in small ones. How about yourself? What was your response to this opening little tidbit about the earthquake, Avalon?
Yeah, I think it did some work in setting the scene, and I certainly got the idea of the I guess, like the size and scope and all of that. I did find like the opening maybe a little bit too Vancouver-y, maybe a little bit too focused on trying to cover a lot of ground and how all these different people were affected, or different demographics. So that took me out a little bit. Yeah, I think it might have been a little bit more powerful if it had just really been like focused on what does that actually mean in terms of if that's that size earthquake were to happen here. Because I think if you've grown up in the Lower Mainland, you've spent a lot of time in school preparing for earthquakes, and like there's a lot of, I think, focus on that, and this sort of knowledge that we probably just kind of keep in the back of our minds that one day, maybe in our lifetimes, maybe not, this earthquake is coming. And yeah, I don't know, maybe I didn't find this opening took it as seriously as I would have maybe expected.
I think I'm going to echo that as a theme of something that an issue I had with sort of a lot of the chapters here is it just constantly felt like I'm not sure that I buy the lack of urgency. I don't know that it ever wrecked it for me, but it does make it less and less an earthquake book. I will say that. And I don't know if maybe that is probably what I would prefer, because I'm not sure how much of a disaster film you can make out of a novel. Like, so much of that is spectacle and like, it is a heightened reality. It is a metaphorical analysis. The earthquake is probably less the point than anything else.
I think that's a good point. I think though maybe this is the disconnect for me a little bit with these later chapters, and I'm sure we'll kind of get more into them. But the thing is, I think when you're telling a compelling disaster story, whether that be natural disaster or supernatural or whatever it is, right? Like a volcano, an earthquake, zombies, whatever it is, right? I think that, there's a natural sort of structure to it where it makes sense to kind of start way out so that you can really show the scale of the disaster. Right. But then as you're getting into the real meat of the story, like, you want to bring it in. And so I think that structure that this novel has, like with almost all of the characters being in the same place, and then you're sort of dealing with them in that setting, is a good one. But you have to, so I guess like the going back and forth piece wasn't as successful for me. Like, it was more, okay, we know this earthquake's here, like, let's really shock and awe, and then let's focus on what that does to the small group of individuals, right, and the breaking down of society and all of that.
Yeah, and to address what GS is adding in the chat here, first of all, GS, I will repeat their terms here. I expected more, having experienced the Alaska earthquake and watching all the Japan ones. But that was okay because I had some trepidation about reading the book. I was worried it'd be too scary. I expected boom. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. You know what? The thing is like, I haven't been in an earthquake. I will have to take GS's, sort of point on that. But I have a conception of what an earthquake is, and this isn't about a real earthquake. So, like, I do feel like there is a responsibility to sort of heighten and meet a certain expectation. And for those who might think that's a bit weird, I do want to point out that as a writer, the biggest mistakes I've ever made is to base a fiction story on a real thing really accurately. No one buys it. And I don't know what it is about reality, but it doesn't translate perfectly to fiction. So, I mean, I liked it. I do feel like if you're on the coastline of Vancouver, there's probably a lot more destruction. And there's this line about, the car being completely flipped over. But as far as I can tell, all that happened in the house is some stuff tipped. Mm-hmm. And like, I was like, okay, but I get that the house is probably the setting here. But that seemed weird.
Yeah, I agree with you. And yeah, I think there, there's some more stuff in the later chapters that kind of feeds into that a little bit. Mm-hmm. But yeah, like like it wasn't, I think, until we get into, Charlotte's bit where you're sort of really getting into it. And like, Kyle's up there on a mountain and he seems mildly inconvenienced by the earthquake. And I think there was a comment in there about, you're higher up, like maybe there's less of an impact, which okay, not too sure about that. But
I think that works more for Charlotte than it does for where Kiki is, for sure. I mean, okay, so that technically that's our next part. So all I want to say in closing on this first like weird little snippet at the beginning, not weird, just weird in that it doesn't have a chapter, but it basically functions as a chapter, this is the first time we see any concern from Sydney about her father. That's it's okay.
Yeah.
This is the first time that she's like, is my dad okay? And she's worried because she sees the car flipped and stuff like this. Which I don't even think in this part we really get much insight on, even in some of the chapters after this, as to where that reaches and where exactly it comes from. But it is of note. I just sort of bookmarking it here, signposting it here. This is the first time we see Sydney care about her dad. So with that said, I mean, obviously people are itching to move on to chapter 7. So chapter 7 is when we start switching perspectives. And yeah, we get that opening little chunk where it's talking about the various vignettes. I do want to give credit to the author here. This is an idea that I wouldn't have probably thought of on my own that does solve a problem I didn't realize until I read this section, which is this story by its design, by the voices it's chosen, and by how it's chosen to structure itself, is going to be pretty myopic. It's going to be pretty small in its viewpoints because it's about a group of people in one house in a fairly upscale neighborhood. And what we wouldn't get without these vignettes is the larger sense of scale of destruction and all the so on. And in a lot of ways, that's the outer stakes of them getting along. So I think these little italicized introductions are a clever way of being like, remember, there is a world outside of them. I don't love everything in them, but I will say as a concept, it's practically a necessary thing. I wouldn't have thought of it, but now that I've seen it, I'm like, yeah, this story really needs that. But yeah,
I would agree with that. I think that's a good point for sure.
I am curious though, how our audience, other members of the book club, they how you folks feel about these little sort of opening vignettes to each chapter. But then as we move into chapter 7, we get what I would say is the high point of this section, which is the title of this video, and we'd be remiss not to discuss it, which is Tayne has well-deserved brain damage. Tayne Stedman, if you folks do not recall, is a jerk. And the
worst.
And I can see, by the way, without giving anything away, I can see that in these chapters, we are meant to start to see things, the complexity of his character. Yep. And I'm not going to do it. I refuse.
No. No, you don't. No, you're not gaining. You're not garnering any sympathy with this guy, no matter what kind of backstory
it's too real.
You give him. Yeah.
And I guess if I wanted to put some meat on the bones here, on that opinion, rather than just sort of being cheeky about it, I have a perspective that I won't hold people to account to like their own processing of their trauma pretty much until about age 30. Because by about age 30, I mean from your parents, by about age 30, you've probably spent 10, if your parents are particularly bad, 15 years on your own. And if in that time you've never, if you've not processed it, at this point it's time to go to therapy, right? Like at that point, you're just making everyone around you your therapist or deluders. And I don't know, at some point you got to hold, it's not your fault, but it is your damage to deal with.
It's also at one point, it's just no longer interesting to treat your childhood as the main component of your life rather than a prologue. And I think, the older you get, like either, you have to sort of figure out, is this what's going to define me for the rest of my life? Mm-hmm. Or do I have an opportunity with these, dozens of other years that I can spend doing something else and recovering from that and defining myself in a different way. So yeah, I think it's like, yeah, all right, Tayne had kind of a shitty childhood. Lots of people have had shitty childhoods.
That's right. Lots of people have. Not
all of them are
psychotic and abusive.
Yeah.
So like it's GS makes a good point here, and I assume this is regarding sorry that the lag makes it so sometimes we have to jump around a bit for people. Oh no, there's two of me now and they're in mirror. Are you still there?
Still there. Sorry, I'm just the sun's
Oh, I see.
Through, so I was just dealing with that.
Okay, there we go. I'm sure that was a strange experience for the audience. Just all of a sudden two mirrored me's. Anyways, the point is, GS says, I think the opening chapter was more impactful, read the physical effects of the earthquake. And I think that's probably to be expected, honestly, because this is in contrast to the vignettes at the beginning of the chapter, because those vignettes don't focus in on any one experience. And as many writer friends have pointed out to me, and I've pointed out to other writers, people experience the world from one perspective. So the further you get away from that, the more alien it starts to feel and less impactful. So I would say that makes sense to me, why that opening was probably the most impactful telling of what the earthquake was like. But going back to Tayne, I mean, a moment of silence, of course, and some sympathy for the Bluetooth that didn't deserve to die in that way. But I will say that I appreciate, now normally I'm bothered by stuff like this, but I appreciate the sheer refusal to be subtle about the metaphor of jamming his Bluetooth in the face. Like, it feels like true wish fulfillment on the behalf of the author, that they know someone like Tayne, and the one thing they've always wanted to do is jam that goddamn thing in their face, right? And I feel like that's a thing that we can all relate to.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah, I also, I will say this about this section and about Tayne. I did appreciate his mercenary, self-involvement about, all right, okay, so here's my daughter. She's upset. She's not hurt. Now let's get back to dealing with this issue that I have, and what do I need to do to get her to do what I want? And I think, that we get sort of that peek into Tayne's, psyche there, and like the way that he operates on a very kind of microcosm level here. We're like, here's my daughter who is probably emotionally, like psychology, mentally in distress, but she's not physically hurt. So now I'm immediately switching to dealing with this problem that I have and how I can get her to help me with it.
I think I agree. As a character moment, as a writer creating a character moment, what you look for, of course, is how to do a lot with a little. And I think you're right. It both helps us define their relationship, helps us get some clarity about, like, what is he doing with his daughter and how does he regard her, but also gives us some insight into probably the most charitable version of how you become a person like that, right? Like maybe it's not malice, it's just kind of disinterest, right? Which
this viewing of everyone in a very transactional way. Yes. And that
everything is a transaction is a good way to put it. I almost flipped my way past this. In the beginning of the italicized section of chapter 7, there's something there that seems to echo what you had said on the last episode, which is there is an explicit repetition of all the different mums that were affected by the earthquake. I was wondering if that had any impact with you, because you had talked about this idea of a theme in the first section that the world needs mothers. I was wondering if you feel that's the author making a more clearer indication of that being a theme, or if it's just maybe a neat trick of language.
Yeah, I didn't really pick up on that, but I do think that, not to jump ahead, but I do think that, what we kind of see in these chapters is, this perspective of each character looking towards someone else to bring kind of sense as to what has happened. And
that's a good point.
The person, for the Stedmans at least, the person who holds everything together is Charlotte, and Charlotte is out in Abbotsford getting goat cheese. So
for some reason,
is not there, and so I think it's kind of maybe pushing home this point about who is it that is actually going to be able to take care of things when there's this kind of disaster, and how things fall apart when they're not there.
I completely agree. I don't think I'd put it together that way, but that's a much smoother way of putting it together than the notes I had. And that, I think the only one that didn't feel honest to me, like it felt like it was hard for me to accept that character really thought that, was Joe's. Joe being like, I wish Kiki was here. His commander, Kiki is a wreck all the time from what we've seen. Joe is the glue that holds Kiki together. I can understand that he wants Kiki around, but at no point did I get the impression that Joe felt like Kiki was the organizing pillar of his life. I think I agree. Yeah, and I think that we miss out a little bit by not seeing Kiki in his professional setting. True.
Because I think, for someone to have, their own practice and be quite successful, and, and it sounds like, he doesn't really take time off, and he's always working and doing all that. So he must be pretty put together and, on top of things professionally. But we don't really see that. Like, the only Kiki that we really see is this guy kind of spiraling out because he's in this relationship that he doesn't want to be in anymore, and he's
infantile
made some poor choices.
too. Infantile.
Yeah, just being really kind of selfish and stupid about it. And so we don't. Yeah, this is I think in terms of all the characters, Joe and Kiki are the ones that just seem the most one-dimensional to me. I think and maybe Joe not necessarily one-dimensional, but there's a different Joe that shows up on the page than what we're being told Joe is.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that, yeah.
Kind of a dick in this, like throughout.
I guess everyone here is kind of a dick. Joe bothers me less than a lot of people. I think probably the person I have the most sympathy for is either going to be Sydney or Anna.
Of course.
As the book wears on, I have less sympathy for almost everybody else. GS makes a good point here, though, and also Just Fleece It Out is here. Hello, Just Fleece It Out. Thank you for coming back. GS says, we miss our partners in any crisis, and I guess that's fair enough. Like, you miss sort of any sort of sense of ritual and comfort when you're in crisis.
Unless you're Charlotte.
yeah, which is the one that I can't wait to get to, but I'm trying to make sure I cover everybody first, because I have the most things to say about Charlotte. There was some charity I gave her last time that I'm not giving her this time. I do find it interesting that Joe is fitting into a role as a protector. I don't feel like that's too unfounded, and it's one of the more true things that I see about his character. He does feel like a sort of friendly father figure, and I think that Sydney picks up on that.
I think he seems very capable and competent, and that he knows what needs to be done.
And that's when he reads the truest. When he isn't taking Tayne shit or anything like that. Like, that's the kind of guy that I feel like I've met on work sites, which I think is who he's meant to emulate. The only other thing I wanted to mention before we go on to Charlotte is Kiki says the Lord's Prayer, which is a revealing moment, given that he is a gay man with a lot of problems, and that's not necessarily a place that's very friendly to the gays. And obviously, A, him having a past as a Catholic is one thing, but B, and I guess you could say the Lord's Prayer doesn't guarantee that he's a Catholic, but it almost certainly does. I was a Protestant of various... By Protestant, I mean one of the many groups of Protestants. When I was a kid growing up in my high school years, and like nobody there says the Lord's Prayer. That's a Catholic thing. So like it tells us that he is probably Catholic, but not only that he's kind of still hanging on to it, which is an interesting moment that isn't followed up on it really in any part of the next few chapters, because Kiki barely does anything in the next few chapters, which is fine, because Kiki is probably one of the most boring people in here. The book seems to know who's interesting right now and does a good job focusing on those people. Is there anybody else I'm going to steamroll if I start talking about Charlotte? I don't think so. Let's talk about Charlotte. I just want to make sure I don't talk about, because she starts to dominate the next 3 chapters, period.
She's well, in my opinion, she is the best part of this book.
Yeah, as I was reading it, I was like, Avalon's gonna love this. I find her very entertaining, but I have decidedly come to hate her, which is something
I have a lot of empathy for Charlotte. She makes some pretty selfish choices, but I think, I don't know, I have some understanding of them.
Yeah, carry on. Go ahead. I mean, keeping in mind in chapter 7, the only thing that really has happened so far is that she uses the cheese lady's computer and reads Facebook.
Oh, I love this whole part. I love this whole chapter. I think it is so funny. Not to dump on Abbotsford or our neighbors out to the east there, but oh my God, just their whole interaction just rings so true, and I understand the frustration, but I think there's also, like, here's Charlotte, like, obviously on the verge of some sort of breakdown or something. Like, she's just, she's built up too much resentment about her life. Like, she's doing way too much. She doesn't have a break. Like, there's no kind of release for her. And then here she is out in Abbotsford buying GD cheese, and there's an earthquake, and she can't get a hold of anyone. She doesn't know what's going on. And then she goes on Facebook and sees, like, what a little shit her daughter is, after, it's probably, Charlotte's probably the reason that her daughter is, still alive. So I think, I think we're kind of seeing Charlotte have, like, a bit of a break, and just sort of seeing this as, here's an opportunity for me to just cut loose without really having to deal with the consequences, because she can't. They can't get a hold of her. She can't get a hold of them. So who knows what she could be doing. So I think this is sort of Charlotte's, like, lost weekend here, where she's just kind of saying fuck it, and listening to the ego, right, and not her better self.
Okay. I think I can understand the sort of wish fulfillment of it. I do. But I have a slightly different perspective on this. There is a quote that I cannot bring to mind that says this clearer, but basically the things that you get the most angry about are the things that are the most true about yourself. And that's exactly why you get angry, because you don't really have a refutation of it. And I think that while she gets really angry at her daughter calling her a liar, it's pretty clear in this same section that she is a liar, specifically to her daughter, because she tries to act like she's doing this for her daughter, which she isn't. She comes right out and says it, that basically she chose to have the kid as an FU to her mom. And that's a terrible reason to bring an entire human into existence. And then I hate that Tayne had to say it, because I don't want to ever agree with anything he says. But in a later chapter, I'm sorry, I'm pouring my own world here, but in a later chapter, he talks about how her relationship with Sydney is basically picking at her like a spreadsheet. And and how in this section, with her description of how her daughter has impacted her life and the decisions she made and why she made them, that her daughter is really just an extension of her own self-image. And where I do find the most sympathy for Charlotte, though, if you'll allow me to keep talking, because this isn't a short thought, but where I do find some sympathy, and this is going to take a weird turn for a second, but hear me out, chat. I read this chapter, I closed it, and then I watched She-Hulk, the first episode of She-Hulk, okay, which is already a strange start. Now, She-Hulk wasn't a very good show because, Marvel is mixed bag. I like Marvel, it's a guilty pleasure of mine, but it's hard for me to defend. But She-Hulk is, on its face, as blatant as possible about feminist issues. The issue that I encountered with it, though, was it reminded me, I'm not going to go into She-Hulk here, but it reminded me that I lived through this sort of fever pitch of girl boss feminism. And yeah. And so for people who don't know what exactly is girl boss feminism, it's all the parts of feminism that capitalism could stomach. Right? It's none of the challenging systemic stuff. It's just the idea that the problem with feminism is somewhere between men don't have manners and women should be allowed to be CEOs. Like, that's about as far as it's willing to go. And I'm not disagreeing with those, but I am saying that if that's the beginning and end of your analysis of why women have a problem in a patriarchal society, that's idiotic, I'll be frank.
Let's they're not women bosses.
Yeah.
They're girl bosses.
That's right, girl bosses.
But we're still keeping them down.
And
down the corporate ladder there.
And I gotta say, going back to this book, which I think, I'm not comparing this to She-Hulk, I'm contrasting it. Going back to this book, what Charlotte read to me when I went back to it and read more chapters was as a sort of refutation to girl boss feminism. That in a lot of ways, what it's meant to show is like being, everything that capitalism wants you to be or will allow you to be as a woman isn't necessarily satisfying what you want or where you want to be. And it's not necessary, I guess, to put it really bluntly, there's no liberation in capitalism. Right. And
we're all enslaved in capitalism.
That's right.
Yeah.
And what we see in Charlotte is someone who has the best opportunity of some kind of freedom and yet still is completely imprisoned and behaving in spite. And the way that it really boils down for me, though, is that if she is all of that is fine if she got up and left and was like, screw Tayne and whatever else. Yeah. But she had a kid. That's a different story. That's a human being that didn't ask to exist. And that's where she kind of loses a lot of my sympathy.
And I think looking at chat, I think GS is making a really good point with, talking about, how Charlotte is really like reacting to the situation as opposed to compartmentalizing it. And I think that's like a pretty good insight into Charlotte's character, and that like she is incredibly reactive. Her decisions are based on the feeling that immediately comes to the surface. Like there isn't a lot of self-reflection or delaying of gratification for her at all. And maybe that's like in part because of the fact that she has never really had to deny herself anything because of her inherited wealth. But then it's also like she doesn't really have to deal with consequences, right? Like she's in this shitty marriage, but they're both sort of tied to each other financially and in other ways. And so she can kind of do this stuff and behave in a certain way, and then there's not going to be a consequence. I mean, same with her her daughter. It's not like Tayne's gonna suddenly, be an ally for Sydney and try and counter like the shitty parenting that she's getting from her mother. Like, he's basically washed his hands and abdicated from any sort of parental responsibility. So I think like she's an incredibly reactive person because she's never had to be anything other than that. Plus I think it's and I was reading something and I was trying to remember what it was, but it was talking about this whole idea about women having it all. And that sure, like, you can have it all, you just have to decide what matters most to you and recognize the work that you will have to put in, right, and what you give up to kind of have it all. And I was trying to remember where I was reading that, but it was just sort of, I think, laying waste to this whole idea of girl bosses and the hustling and all of that nonsense.
Hustle culture bullshit.
Where we're finally, I think, seeing the end of that, and hashtag quiet quitting all the way.
Also known as doing your job.
I know, right?
By the way, for people who don't know, who aren't chronically online like Avalon and I, the quiet quitting is a slang term that's come around for people who show up on time, leave when their shift is done, and don't do unpaid overtime. Like, that's not a joke. That's what it is.
Meeting, the requirements of their their work contract.
That's right. Yeah. Not giving unpaid labor, not giving into wage theft is quiet quitting.
And I see, just Fleece It Out also said, Charlotte's constantly having to make snap decisions by always being overloaded with work. I think, again, like, another good point where, you're working in the type of industry, like, big corporate industry where the way to get ahead is not generally through like thoughtful contemplation. So I think that's another kind of reiteration of the fact that like Charlotte is she's just existing and reacting to things and not really giving herself any room or space to think through her actions, as we will see in later chapters.
Yeah, I guess I just want to point out that some of the actions that I'm kind of judging her on are likely ones that weren't made in this fever pitch, though. Like, the decision to have a child doesn't sound like it was made when she was on her way to be a CEO and stuff. It sounded like it was pretty much explicitly made as like a flip off to her mom, which is horrible.
Yes. And then it also sounds like her mom's awful.
Yes, it does.
It's kind of like,
does.
the cycle, right?
It does.
Like,
but it does.
Parent begets shitty parent.
One of these is old and has had time to do other things with that. One of these is a young girl trying to make sense of her life with two parents who essentially just use her for their own image. And I guess where my distaste for Charlotte, again, I don't mean that in a way of like, I don't want her in this book. It's not like my distaste for Tayne. Like, if Tayne died, I'd be like, cool. My distaste for Charlotte is a good one in the sense that it makes her a compelling character that I want to read.
Well, I think that's just it, right? Like, and I know for anyone who has watched other lit games with me, I'm really into unlikable characters, like nobody wants to read a book about like great people, right? Like I'll butcher the Tolstoy quote, but like I want unhappy, miserable, self-destructive people over happy families any day. It makes for way more compelling reading.
Yeah, I think I go back and forth, but I will say I tend to write miserable, broken people.
It's way more fun.
Yeah, there are other reasons for it as well. Oh, chat's been going pretty well. Just Fleece It Out and says she's constantly having to make. I think you did address this, but she's constantly having to make sap decisions by always being overloaded with her work. They reference that so many times, how it's now or never. Yeah, this sort of self-inflicted lack of insight. Because if she does think about it too long, like, I mean, in this section, her concern is about finding a phone to see if the meeting's been postponed. Like it is a person who is pathologically lost in her own lack of an identity outside of everything else that she's propped up around it. And I think it's interesting because what we do start to see in later chapters is maybe who she is without that stuff. And I don't hate her except for the fact that that person doesn't care about people that probably need her to.
She procreated, and
that's right.
Her actions don't just affect her; they affect a minor.
That's right.
who is under her care. No, absolutely.
Frankly, being held to a higher emotional standard than she's holding herself. She's like, here's a daughter who is in the midst of high school, in the midst of addiction, and she herself can barely maintain her own composure, but she expects her daughter to be like sober and fine and not bother her and like. I mean, it's not helped by the fact that Tayne is as useful as a
literal
word,
worse.
Chapter 8, I guess. Let me shift us on. So, in chapter 8, we get a little bit more of Kiki climbing the mountain. There's this thing about him sort of fighting a chill, which I can kind of understand because he's wearing clothing that's meant for exercise. There is a heavy emphasis with Kiki on negative self-talk, which is something we could look at if we wanted. We see more of Joe becoming a paternal figure to the group, though he does, I think, in this chapter, or maybe more so the next one, just kind of disappear. And I'm not sure where he goes, and then we kind of find out at the end. I don't know, it was a little strange for me, because he starts out as kind of the star of this part.
I thought he was out checking, the electrical boxes or something.
We find out at the end of chapter 9. Anyway, sorry. Dodie and Anna kind of stay in the same gear, I will say. Though it is revealed that Anna is a nurse, which is something we can talk about, which really kind of highlights her pay a bit more.
I would like to draw attention to the opening line of the actual, or I guess the section right after. So Kiki's up on this mountain. It feels like he's been climbing this mountain for the entire book. And then we go back to Joe, and like Joe's little opening line here, like, I live with a doctor. I know a little about wounds, and I'm gonna call nonsense on this because they've been together for 5 years. Kiki is a plastic surgeon. He has set up a profitable practice. What are the wounds that Joe knows about? Because that's not what Kiki does. And he wouldn't have had that part of his training, I think, well before him and Joe got together. So
also, I to echo your point, as a person, for those who don't know, I was a medic, not a paramedic, a medic. Paramedics know more than me. And I can tell you that the skills that a doctor knows is not the skills that a nurse has, is not the skills that a medic has. And what you want in a scenario that they're describing is either a medic or a nurse, not a doctor. Doctor would be
100%.
friggin' useless.
I live with a nurse.
Oh yeah, that's right, you do, yeah.
And I know a little bit about wounds. No, I don't. I'm kidding. I don't know anything.
I wondered if I'd forgotten this.
No, I don't know anything, but yeah, I think like you want someone who's there able to triage, right? And I think my point is that just because Joe lives with a doctor, like, is not going to give him any more knowledge about anything, because like the reality of Kiki actually practicing the practical knowledge about first aid is just so remote.
Just he gets home from work and he's like, "Hey, do you want to see how to bandage some wounds? What? Can we watch a movie?" Or No, come here. I want to show you. This is... I do want to draw attention to that the chat has made a good point that I think kind of connects the last chapter into this one and to last week's, which is Just Fleece It Out points out that Charlotte has the sneaky hidden pills that she lies about to protect her daughter, and then GS says, how dare her daughter lean on drugs to cope, despite the very obvious implication that that's exactly what her mother does. Which is
not like this is learned behavior or anything.
Which I feel like is a bit of a subtext that I don't know if I wasn't picking up on it, but there were lots of times where I was like, it feels like Charlotte might be a bit high. I don't know if that was accurate or not, but at times her buzzing and her quick anger and stuff I started wondering, I was like, this is kind of like a person with a bit of an upper pill addiction. But I don't know. We'll see if that's a later... It was just a thing. Anyways, sorry. I
see GS, though, has said, but during regular accidents, maybe Kiki had explained things. That's true. That's possible.
Doesn't seem like Kiki
it's a good point. Yeah. I think, I think part of it is that I find, with Joe as a character, I think I'm just really struggling from the way that he kind of presents himself and the way he was presented when we first met him as, I think, Kiki refers to him as a puppy, and there's this real push for him to be viewed as this just kind of, a bit doofusy, lovable kind of guy. But the way that he interacts with every character but Kiki is not great. And yes, one of them is Tayne, and Tayne is the worst. But I did even find myself, and I hope I'm not, I might be getting a bit too ahead of myself. But just, I think there's some moments where, like, I was maybe feeling a bit for Tayne over Joe, because he's very aggressive in his disdain for these people. And I think, he's helping out Sydney and he's helping everyone out and trying to figure things out. But he's sort of doing it in this way that is just very, very hostile. I don't know if I was the only one who noticed that or what you thought, Rory.
Well, I think I don't judge him for it because I know where it comes from because of sharing it, which is if you grow up poor, you're pretty bitter against very rich people in West Van. I used to have to go and tour construction projects in West Van, and just watching the amount of crap that people would buy when I know, people in my family who struggle to pay for a bumper on their car and stuff, like it breeds a bitterness. It breeds a disdain of, you have no idea who I am or what it is to live my way, but you think we're on even footing. I don't want to even talk to you because it's not even worth it to try and explain. Like, I guess I do relate to that.
Okay.
It might be, but what I would say is I think it's probably on the book to try and bring people around to that. If the point of a book is to share multiple perspectives, it's to do it from a sympathetic position, I assume, or at least an empathetic one. So if people aren't picking up on that, then I would say the author might needed to be a little more explicit. I do feel like this book is pretty much written for a sort of lower middle class Vancouverite who might have already picked up on that kind of stuff. That's my only perspective on it.
Yeah, I find that interesting because, the thing is that, okay, so both Joe and Tayne, like, grew up, it sounds like, in similar socioeconomic situations. And yes, obviously Tayne is very well off at this point, but they kind of share a similar background. And like the thing is that Joe is not really in a position of economic scarcity, right? Like, he lives in West Van, and yes, like, that's sort of possible due to his partner, but it sounds like he's got like a pretty good life and kind of works because he wants to, as opposed to having to. And I think there'd be a lot of people who would sort of look at that situation and be like, what is your, what are you complaining about, right? Like, you've got a pretty good setup, a setup that a lot of people would want to have. So I think, yeah, I think I just kind of struggle with his reaction to things
I think
because,
it's sorry.
no, I think, yeah, I think it's just, yeah, because of that, the similar backgrounds, but also that's not where he is in his life anymore, right? And
I mean, I guess I could offer
yeah.
two things there. One is that I'm not saying it's necessarily fairly founded. It's a kind of like deep-seated bitterness that would probably take some time to get over it. That's born from a kind of humiliation of poverty in your youth. I do think that you're fair in pointing out that Tayne and Joe are both sort of, I had the words and then they slipped away, but are both sort of what happens, two ways of kind of manifesting that humiliation. Like, one runs completely away from it and one sort of maintains themselves in those circles because they don't understand the other ones they're in. I would say though that if the purpose of Joe is to be sort of the working class stand-in, I don't buy him as that. I would agree with that. The working class stand-in for me is Anna. And I guess what I would point out is to some extent class extends beyond current material conditions. It's got a lot more to do with conditions and access and previous things that give you sort of more of a buffer in your current time. Like, if Kiki leaves, which it seems like it is, does that put Joe in a difficult position in the Vancouver home market, whereas if Tayne is left, he's not. So, like, I think it's a bit more than just how are you doing? But I don't want to turn this into all of that.
No, I think that's a good point. I think it's just, I think what you said about, Anna kind of being the stand-in, like, that rings true for me because looking at it, it's like, okay, well, who's sort of dealing with like the highest stakes, if things don't go well. And, I think if Joe and Kiki break up, they'll probably be okay. They're common law. He's got some legal recourse there. But, if Miss Doty dies or sort of gets rid of Anna, like, she's sort of really left like in a tough spot. And so, like, her desperation and her kind of feelings of helplessness that we really get into, like, kind of in this section, like, that feels really, really true to me, where she's in charge of looking after Miss Doty during this very high stress in this very high stress situation, where she's also dealing with the after effects of being in that situation. So, like, I think that's sort of, I think, an interesting perspective that we're kind of getting, because it does, like, it feels very, very high stakes for Anna right now.
And I'll sort of put it straightforward too. I'm not sure that the text of the book has ever really said this, but I think it's fair to point out that being an immigrant of minority status, a woman, is probably a worse position to be in, period, than any position that Joe's in. Yes, queerness does play a factor in certain levels of oppression and poverty, obviously. But I feel like she's got the most vulnerability here and is therefore in the position where she has to swallow the most crap. And I think it is interesting to point out, as you point out, Joe doesn't really do that. And that speaks to Joe having a greater power structurally in this situation than Anna does. Or, frankly, Miss Doty does at this point, but maybe for multiple reasons. That it really is two poor kids with a chip on their shoulder arguing in an upstairs while a bunch of injured people are taking care of each other downstairs. And I don't think that's an accidental image.
Yeah.
I want to give some love to the live chat, because they're giving us a lot. GS says, I'm surprised Miss Doty is not more shaken up. Seniors with dementia are very disturbed by sudden change, displaying crying and other signs of distress. I don't have any experience with that. My sister is a healthcare on the dementia ward, works as a nurse, so I can ask her. But I would trust that GS would know this better than I. All I can think is, as a writer, I might think, what can I do with that? Like, there's nowhere really for me to go, because I don't really know where there is to go with the character of Miss Doty at this point, other than she is a weight around Anna's neck, and I don't know, that's a bit of a weird thing. But Just Fleece It Out says, or maybe she's at that sweet spot where she isn't understanding the situation, thinking it's a restaurant, and that is shielding her from the stress and weight of the situation. Yeah, but I guess what I would say is, like, if she was that far gone, I don't think she would be as competent in the previous interactions we saw. Like, if she didn't notice an earthquake happened and it like upset her on a fundamental level, I feel like she would barely even know she was at a barber's. Like, Just Fleece It Out, though, does add, my grandma's slipping into it and used to be scared and angry. That has shifted to calm as a cucumber, more so than I've ever seen. So it's possible, I guess. So maybe it's just different stages of this horrible degenerative disease. Yeah,
I think that it was actually useful to kind of build out the preoccupation with the ring beforehand, because I think speaking from my limited experience with people dealing with dementia, there's a high level of sort of distraction, but once there's focus on something, it's really, really hard to shake that. So I thought it was sort of, useful for her to be okay. Like, she's really focused on this ring, and yes, there's this stressful situation, and, we have this moment these moments where she does seem to be impacted by that, but then it's almost like she focuses back on, the primary sort of challenge that she's dealing with, which is about the ring. But I think, I find, like, the Miss Doty character, there's not a lot to go with there. And then it's also like she seems to be competent enough to, like, order Anna around, but not competent enough to really manage any aspect of her own life. And I think when you sort of get to that point with dementia or Alzheimer's or whatever it is, you're really, you're losing all your autonomy, and that doesn't seem to necessarily be the case with Miss Doty.
You make a good point, though, because if we recall again that, like, first and foremost, fiction books are works of metaphor and then realism. The state that Miss Doty's in may not be an attempt to completely adequately reflect the actual progression of it. I don't know, maybe it is, but it's probably just as much meant to reflect exactly what you just said, which is incompetent at your own life, but sharp as a tack at getting other people to tend to it, which seems to speak to sort of the classist themes of Anna and Doty's relationship. And frankly, Tayne and everyone around him. These people that excel at manipulating people into doing things for them, but don't do anything themselves.
Yeah.
I do feel like I don't know what Miss Doty's role is in this story anymore. Like, I feel like I'm not saying I wanted this, but if she got hit in the head and died, the story would not have changed it in this section.
Well, I do think, and again, like, I think that I need the stakes to be a little bit higher, I think, in this story. And, there's a lot of really great, like, dark humor, and, there's a lot of commentary around, class and the things that we need from people and how we go about getting that. But I think fundamentally, like, you're telling a disaster story,
Yeah.
right? And there needs to be things need to be high stakes. And so I would be disappointed if we get to the end and no one's died.
Yeah, I agree with that. I honestly thought someone would die in the earthquake. I was hoping it'd be Tayne, but brain damage is one I'll take as well. But yeah, I agree. I mean, we're not even we're just about halfway through the book now, so I mean, there's plenty of opportunity for that third act to be sort of crazy. I kind of hope it's not just like people having conversations for 200 pages and then like we all grow. Like, I don't feel like it's going to be that, but I do kind of hope that's not the case. People do need to kind of move a bit, in my opinion. Yeah. The only thing I wanted to say is, do you think there's any metaphorical significance in Kiki getting that chill? Because this chill comes to a character who is said to have the chill. Remember in the first part?
Yeah.
And then it's echoed this sort of, if I could be a snob about medical terms for a minute, this, what the people in the world call shock, which is not shock. It does kind of simulate shock because it does a similar thing, but shock is when you have internal bleeding, not when your body pulls blood in because it's in a state of surprise. But anyways, I'll accept this because most people, that's what they could refer to as shock. I'll accept this after 10 minutes of side explanation of what it's not. But this chill that he gets is echoed in, I believe, Sydney as well. And it connects to this statement about the chill that Joe feels around Kiki. I was wondering if anybody got any in chat or anything like that, got any sort of version of that.
Yeah, I don't know if I picked up on that.
Okay, fair enough. Then you wouldn't have too much.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that Kiki's probably one of my top contenders to die. Which I would actually be, I think, disappointed about, because I think he's sort of being set up as, I feel like if he gets killed off, there's almost like a morality thing happening where, he hasn't been a good partner. He has been unfaithful to Joe. Like, he's, off there on this mountain. So I think, and I might be wrong, but I think Kiki's being set up for either he's either going to die, or it's going to be some sort of reconsidering of his ways and remorse arc, which I also hope doesn't happen.
I don't know what movement. Yeah, you just want him to get worse.
No, I just don't think that a disaster should be used to pass judgment on the choices and behavior that people do, right? Like, I think it should be kind of happen organically. But I think GS agrees with me, because he just said Kiki's the expendable bad guy, which is what I'm getting, right? Like he's not entwined with the other characters. We already have this break between him and Joe. Like, what is he really adding to the plot?
I have no idea what he's adding to the plot, but I get the impression that Joe's the one that's going to die. And that is going to inform Kiki's remorse arc, yeah. That's my guess of it.
Interesting.
Just because Joe is the one who does stuff, right? So in order to get killed in a disaster, you have to go to places where there's risks, and I feel like he's going to try to be doing something to help and get himself killed.
Yeah, I think that's a good point because anyone who survives is going to have some sort of redemption arc.
Which I think is the
And
point of the story, if I'm being
yeah,
honest.
so I think we can probably fairly say that Tayne's going to die.
Yeah,
Saving
or be
saving his daughter.
yeah. Oh, that's true. Yeah, or somehow be disabled is one I could see.
Mm, yeah.
Um, which is always a weird one because it's sort of forced dependency, and I don't know. Anyways,
Well, and then it's also forcing morality on
yeah, yeah.
people with
It's
disabilities,
it's
which is
treating
always a big growth.
disability as like a force. All right, well, I mean that hasn't happened, so I won't judge the story yet, but it is a trope that I'm not a fan of. The okay, I'm gonna move on to chapter 9 because chapter 9 pretty much continues this conversation, so, and it's the longer one anyways. So in this chapter, actually not too many things happen. There's just a lot of breadth given to it. And that is, we see Anna being the nurse to Tayne and thinking about wine to reiterate her alcoholism. And we see Tayne immediately being like, I'm being robbed by these pores. We get a little bit of insight. I forgot to mention this in the early part of part 2. They talk about Tayne's overbearing mother, and here they talk about Tayne's abusive father, physically abusive father. The one thing I didn't see coming though is this is where it's established that Tayne probably has anxiety problems. Then we get to what I honestly think we should probably end the show talking about, which is Charlotte and Hope, which is usually the best part of this whole section. But let's deal with the first two first. I mean, I'll let you have at it. Do you have any thoughts about... Well, I guess I'll add two things. Anna's being the nurse physically to Tayne, but also there's this her being emotionally a sort of an emotional wet nurse to Sydney, while thinking about wine. What does that tell us? Does that tell us anything about the character that we didn't know already, though?
I mean, I appreciated getting like a bit more of Anna's backstory. In her because I think we talk a little bit about her. At least we get like a little bit of her kind of inner thoughts on the situation and how Anna also just doesn't seem like she seems to have a better grasp on what disasters mean, and she doesn't seem to kind of be losing her mind as much as some of the other people. And I think obviously that's contributed to the fact that she's from Ukraine and has lived through several conflicts in Ukraine, and so I think she just has like a bit more of a pragmatic approach, and like she's just sort of viewing it as like, okay, I need to keep my employer alive and get through this, and we can't get kicked out of here. And like it's very look like on the hierarchy of needs, like she's very much looking at the base of the pyramid and be like, okay, what do we need to do to make sure that we have shelter and we have food and that like we're not sort of out on the street. So I thought that kind of gave me, I think, a little bit more insight into her character, which I appreciated.
Yeah, and I think that's captured really well in her description of fish. Like that Miss Doty talks about her husband was some sort of scientist around fish, and that Anna knows what to do with fish, and it is, to fry it, and it's couched in this like situation where you'd be lucky to get fish, and so she kind of knows what the basics of life are and how to maintain them. And that has become quite a bit more important to people that basically live as frivolous leeches, to be honest. And I would agree with that. I don't know where they're going with Anna. I'm curious. I like her. Still feels pretty one note. Nobody's asking about her, so until they do that, She's going to remain one note. So I'm hoping something happens there. The only part that kind of interested me about Tayne was the idea of anxiety. And I do want to point something out here that something I heard a couple of months ago that I found very fascinating. And that was a lot of the worst men were postulated to be men with undiagnosed anxiety problems. And the example that was given was road rage is almost certainly an extension of an anxiety disorder, which is not a perspective I'd ever thought of before. And I don't mean it as like a forgiveness for somebody being that way. But if you are dealing with themes as sort of the patriarchy, to take a turn of phrase, patriarchy is genderless. There will be negative effects in all directions. And one of the ways that patriarchy hurts men is by making them have to manifest all emotional expressions into anger, or not at all. Silence or anger. And the expectation, which is sort of usually more self-imposed than anything, that they're there to control things, right? That this is a mixture of things. So it was interesting to me, the choice to make Tayne a clearly anxious person whose controlling streak was coming from that anxiety. Still don't like him, but it did add some breadth to a character that could otherwise be pretty villainously one note. Well, let's talk about Charlotte then, if you... Because I know that's where you want to go. So we get Charlotte's... I knew what this conversation was going to be ahead of time, but I'm just going to say my piece here. We get Charlotte's tremendously classist view of hope, which I'm telling you right now, because I know Avalon's going to disagree with me. Hope is a beautiful place. I like Hope a lot, but Charlotte is exactly the kind of person who wouldn't like Hope. I get why she doesn't like it. It's a perfectly fine small town that has beautiful Othello tunnels and forests around it that are not destroyed by stupid condos. And, but if I was ever to imagine a hilarious place to send somebody from West Van, Hope would be it. That's, and her hatred of Tim Hortons, for those people who don't know Tim Hortons. Like, I think people know Canadians like Tim Hortons and all that, but I don't think people quite get the context, the cultural context of it. There is a cultural context to Tim Hortons. The way that I characterize Tim Hortons is it is the cafeteria for Canada. Nobody loves it, but it's on a lot of corners and it tends to like fill a gap when you need it. If you just need a coffee, you can probably find it. It tends to be cheaper than Starbucks. It's not very good. If you aren't the kind of person, which a lot of Canadians aren't, that don't consider like a burger a regular thing you have for a lunch, the sandwiches and stuff at Tim Hortons are good. What I'm trying to say is like it's utilitarian. It's not like as much a part of identity as people say, but it's very utilitarian. And I think if you were reading this book and you didn't know that, it might not come across exactly why Charlotte doesn't like it. And that is because it is in no way catered or special for anyone. It's just food. It's just coffee. Here you go. Get out of the way.
Neither are very good.
It's okay. If you need it, it's there. Nobody cares if you didn't get it exactly the way you wanted it, right? Like, it's that kind of place. Anyways, I wanted to let you run on this section because when I was reading it, I was like, this is like written for Avalon.
Maybe I'm over identifying with Charlotte a bit much here. But I think I see just Lisa it out says everyone from Ontario I've ever met has a strange obsession, deep love for Tim Hortons, and I think that's a really good point because I think that the whole Canadian identity Tim Hortons thing is an East Coast, East Canada thing. I don't think that it's as much like there's as much of a culture around it in BC at least, and definitely not on the West Coast. I actually, in my youth, I actually worked at Tim Hortons for about 2 weeks before I walked out in the middle of a shift because it was so hellish and I think I was 19. So I have a bit of a deep I don't know, not necessarily grudge, but just avoidance of Tim Hortons. I think it's, yeah, not a fan. And I'm also not a fan of Hope. I spent quite a few summers as a youth camping and having to stop and Hope, and it's just, I think Charlotte says it best at the beginning of her section. No offense to anybody from Hope or the Fraser Valley, but no, not my favorite place. But this section is so great. I know exactly the Tim Hortons that Charlotte is in on the outskirts of Hope.
Yeah, me too.
I can like picture her just this, boiling, contained rage as she's just like contemplating, how on earth did I get here? I hate everything about this. This is like I'm out here buying stupid cheese for a husband that I hate. Like it's just yeah, I completely am within her frame of mind, and understand where she's coming from. And it's this hard lean into all of the things that, or all the characteristics about Vancouver, about the West Coast, about, West Van, all of that, like all of that snobby, pretentious, those kind of characteristics that Vancouver gets accused of, like, is Charlotte personified, like just leading into it hard. And so there's yes, like she's being incredibly classist and snobby and all of that, but I definitely had some recognition about the way that I've thought about, some of these small towns in there. So I think then it's also, it's also picking fun at, I think, Vancouverites in general. And I thought that was really, really well done. And just, the anger, that she is embodying. And there's also, I think she's holding on to it as a way to prevent herself from actually feeling anything, any vulnerability, any, like, I have no, I don't know what's happening with my husband or my daughter or, our friends or family. Like, I have no control over everything here. I'm stuck in this Tim Hortons and Hope, and there's nothing I can do to change this situation. And so I think she's just, again, leaning really hard into kind of anger and petulance and resentment and these feelings that are easier than fear or anxiety or panic or despair or any of that. So I think that's sort of an interesting dichotomy that she's kind of torn between. And I think that we get this sort of rant about all the things that she's angry and pissed off about, but I think if you sort of look at it as a control thing, whereas we talked about before, like she's used to being in charge of everything and whatever she, whatever, behaving and reacting however she wants, and she can't do that right now. And now we just sort of see like this simmering, angry teenager, basically, who's kind of giving into her baser instincts.
I would agree, and I sort of withheld my opinions on her reaction to the cheese lady 2 chapters ago, because what I'd like to say is exactly what you just said, which is we see through these 3 chapters an arc of Charlotte having to come to terms with the fact that not only is she not controlling this situation, she kind of might start to realize she's never controlled any situation. That for the most part, control is an illusion that she has deluded herself with to deal with any number of emotional problems she has refused to contend with. And you're right. We start to see this person that was described to us in the first part as somebody who hangs around backstage and, is a little bit loose and not at all this person that she tries to be to prove whatever to... I don't want to keep bringing it back to this, but I don't think it's accidental that everything she's doing that she hates is done to spite an old feminist. Like, I think there might be some contextual, larger than the character's dialogue going on there. That I think is interesting. I mean, I don't want to delve too deep into it, but I don't think that that's accidental either. Also, I want to say just because I'm assuming, maybe falsely, but I'm assuming that somebody who isn't from Vancouver might watch this or read these books along with us. So I do like to give some context. Aussies in Whistler is a ridiculously true thing. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is specifically about Whistler, because we're not close to Australia. You'll look at a map, we're not close. I mean, arguably nowhere is, but there's lots of places you can go. But for some reason, Australians just love Whistler. And we have actually a weird amount of Australian people that have immigrated here, that the way they started was they came here, worked the summers, and then spent all winter like teaching. Like, if you go to Whistler, there is nobody local teaching anything there. It's just Australians that want to work through the winter so they can ski. But I also want to give some love to Just Fleece It Out, who carries on, I think, quite adequately. I know you say that you're drifting away from the book, but I don't know if that's entirely fair. Giving some good cultural context on Tim Hortons. And why I think it's important to give context on these things is if you are trying to interpret this book and you are not a Canadian or you're not a Vancouverite, some of this stuff might get a little lost. Tim Hortons is distinctly working class, was kind of what I was trying to say before, and her disdain for it echoes her disdain for everything working class anyways. Tim's, and Just Fleece It Out puts it well, Tim's is also the anchor of most developing boony cities, which is true because it's usually open 24 hours, and I think the best example I have of that is Prince Rupert. When I went to Prince Rupert to teach for a couple of weeks, I've done it a few times, Prince Rupert is way the hell up on the coast and near nowhere. If you want to go to the next town, it's about an hour and a half drive. And next town, not next big city, like next town is an hour and a half drive. To actually reach the next big city is something like 4.5 hours. It's an $800 flight to go to Prince Rupert, by the way, which is nuts because you can go to Hawaii for that money. But Prince Rupert had a Tim Hortons on the peak of its hill in its town. And it's like a nightclub at night filled with teens who hang out in the parking lot and buy Tim Hortons because it's the only place open and it's the only place anyone can afford to be, really, when you're young. And it was the truth for me as well in Maple Ridge, which was a fairly working class area. If you were drunk or something, you would stagger with your friends out to the Tim Hortons at 2 a.m. So it definitely represents her disdain for blue collarness. And it's contrasted by the fact that a person, an Aussie from Whistler, almost certainly is doing blue collar work as well. And man, is she suddenly fine with those blue collar boony fellows when they have those Aussie accents.
I think it was also interesting too, like her focus on, like the two older women in the Tim Hortons, and like not to get too caught up on Tim Hortons, but I think in an increasing kind of, secular world, like there's these sort of places that kind of fill the void that perhaps, were done, through churches or, like other sort of community institutions. And growing up in Richmond, I know that like the Tim Hortons is where, like seniors would get together for like coffee at 5 a.m. because it was open, or it was also where like a lot of students would study because it got them out of the house, and libraries would close and they could go there. So I think it's sort of like you almost see this disdain for like this sort of folksy community, from Charlotte, where she's sort of looking at these two women and like, oh, like that kind of life, and there's just like not a lot of value given to it. And then as we sort of learn through the chapters, back at the Stedman's house, like they have no community. They don't know their neighbors. They don't know where anything is. Like they're them in this house, like that's just this trophy house, right? And they have no sense of community. They have no idea who their neighbors are. Like they have no one. They haven't built any sort of networks other than these corporate ones, right? These transactional networks.
That's right. There's no like idle relationships. There's nothing just for pleasure, right? So I thought it was interesting to kind of see that juxtaposition from somewhere like Hope, where a lot of us are probably gonna look down our noses a little bit at it, where there is this sort of more closely knit community versus these segments of West Van where these people have all this money and all this privilege and completely separate from anyone who doesn't benefit them in some way. Yeah, I think that's a fair observation. I wonder how it will be handled if that's the angle going, because I will say there is this trope that really annoys me as a person who kind of grew up poor, which is there's a song about this. I can't think of the name, but it's a famous song of a person, how rich people sometimes just treat working class life as a tourist attraction, right? They'll go and I can't remember the name of the song, but they'll come and hang out with
or like how tour buses in Vancouver go through the downtown east side. They're like, here's the place that you've seen on the news. Many people die here for no good reason. Ooh, click. Anyway. I think it's just I think it goes back to this like we can't equate characteristics to demographics, right? Like poor people aren't necessarily like rich in community, and not all rich people are soulless transactional like psychopaths, right? Like you have to there's people contain multitudes, and I think it's more so I think I kind of saw it more as like just like this sort of class system where maybe you are better off financially, but there's trade-offs, right? Like there's things that are given up as you advance in through socioeconomic brackets, right? And I think it's sort of kind of looking at like the people who are in various stages of that.
Yes.
I also too wanted to add as well, I think when we're talking about Charlotte and her mother and that whole kind of thorny relationship, but I think that something that I've noticed is that like Charlotte lives her entire life in sort of opposition or in reaction to others, like the reactions, like the decisions that she makes are basically, I want to piss off so-and-so, or I want to make some kind of point, or I want to teach so-and-so a lesson. Like there's very little sense of self in the decisions that she makes until we kind of get to this scene, right, where I think we're seeing the Charlotte beneath the marriage and the child and the high powered job and all of that. I think we're kind of seeing her actually making decisions based on, this is what I want.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that what really informs that liberation is her inability. She says it herself. There is no image to upkeep. So she invents a new one.
Yeah.
And I'll be curious if then she starts stressing out about upkeeping that one. Because that seems to be her nature, is to not really so much have an identity as much as place people around her in service to a certain self-image that she is trying to support. All right, well, just Fleece It Out says, I mean, who hasn't stayed in a Tim's in the middle of nowhere to avoid paying for a hotel? I don't know if I've done that. I think I have. I think I have like gone to Tim Hortons if I was waiting for something to open or something like that. And then GS says, as evidenced by the lack of relationship with his CB neighbor. Yeah, there's that section where Tayne is talking about all the, he thinks most of the houses are empty, actually, which is fair enough. Like, that's not an unusual thing in Vancouver for people to just basically leave money in the form of a house here. But it's shown to not necessarily be true. It's just that Tayne has no social tendencies beyond his business. And GS says, what do we think of Charlotte's lies to the Tim's fellow, like Tim Hortons guy? I was pretty shocked because it seemed to me she hadn't really grasped the magnitude of the earthquake. I don't get the impression that Charlotte can grasp anything that isn't in front of her. To go to the point that I wish I'd picked up on sooner, I think both you and the chat did a very good job of explaining it to me. She is an entirely reactionary character. And given that she's not getting video feed, she's not getting pictures, and it's not right in front of her, she just doesn't care about it. Like, if you're a reactionary person, then you kind of lack imagination, really. So I think she says what is a fundamentally absurd thing, which is, like, they'll be fine with each other. Like, it's an earthquake. What are you talking about?
And also, no.
and she is, it's an earthquake, and she is basing her disdain on something that her daughter sent like 7 months ago.
I think we have to all realize that, teenagers are awful. They say horrible
And I'd like to point out,
yeah.
I don't think Sydney's wrong. I think the way that Charlotte is taking that is wrong, in the sense that she thinks she's saying that her mom's a liar in general. I feel like it's about one of two things. It could be more literally about the fact that she knows her mom's having an affair, which hasn't been established anywhere, but it was something I thought of. The timelines seem to line up with that. And apparently they got together at a party, so I'm starting to think that maybe Sydney knows. But also, in that same scene, this is back in chapter 7, Charlotte admits that her affection for her daughter is basically a lie. That she resents ever having her. She even admits that she didn't want to move in with Tayne. That, again, she just kind of reacted her way into a situation that sucks. And so I feel like her daughter can pick up on that fact that she's just a prop to her mom, and that their affection and relationship is a lie. And maybe she's being, to your point, Avalon, she's probably being overly harsh to her mother because she's completely given up on her father. Which is maybe not fair to Charlotte, but also it's not fair to say that Charlotte isn't being a liar here, especially to Sydney. She took her to, rehab, and that's the reason she's alive, as you pointed out. That's great, but she didn't do it for Sydney. It's pretty clear she could care less if Sydney died. She basically did it because she didn't like the image of a drug-addicted daughter.
And it's also like a pretty teenage response to see, someone said something unkind about me
right
on social media. Now I'm gonna punish them, and like even more so, and like this. No, you're the adult in the room.
Yeah, that's right. You are. Yeah.
You have all the power. Be a mother and go talk to your child and implement consequences, or
that's right.
Don't be like, all right, now this gives me free reign to just not communicate with my family,
to abandon her in an earthquake. Yeah. But I do want to be clear for the audience here. I wouldn't have written it any other way if I had that thought, because it makes it far more compelling and interesting. But as a human being, holy crap.
No, none of this is criticism of the book.
Yeah, that's right.
I think Charlotte and her dynamic with the other characters is definitely like the best part.
And Just Fleece It Out says a little underlying theme that her money can't buy her happiness. Definitely not. That her money is absolutely pointless. Frankly, she doesn't even really use it and just goes out of her way to maintain the images that she requires to keep it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I hate to sort of cut us off, but I didn't think we would go this long on 3 chapters. But then again, maybe I did, because you and I like to talk about books. So for those of who are coming by next week, we're going to read part 3, which covers a bit longer, but it's still not as long as the first section. Nothing is as long as the first section, which is 10, 11, 12, and 13. So it'll cover 4 chapters. So next Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. Pacific, 9:30 p.m. Eastern, some other time for other places that I don't know, we will read part 3, 10 to 13, and of course I'll sort of give little updates in the week to remind you guys to cover that. And we'll talk about the other parts on the Big Van Book Club. If you guys are hanging around on the channel, or you are enjoying stuff, of course, remember please to subscribe and like the video. Both helps the channel quite a bit. And tomorrow is Varietal Show, which is where we actually do some writing together with me. And if you guys want to come hang out there, I would be happy to have you. That's at 6:30 as well, Pacific, and 9:30 Eastern. Thank you so much for coming by, Avalon. Thank you so much for your contributions, both to you and GS and Just Fleece It Out, and anybody else who was in the chat that I might have forgotten. I appreciate all of you. Is there anything you want to say closing, Avalon?
Just thanks everyone for tuning in, and I'm looking forward to discussing the next part next week.
You said you already snuck a bit into it, so
I did. Yeah, I've already started reading, and I think we'll have some interesting chats next week. Good.
It's just if I read it and the next chapter is like Kiki's dead, I'll be like, you loaded the deck.
No spoilers. Didn't do any spoilers.
Just making yourself look smart. I think maybe in a chapter. Yeah, and then you already know. All right, I don't really have a catch line yet for this. I sort of figured those out organically. So for now, I'm just going to say, keep reading, and I will see you next week. Thank you very much, and goodbye.